Enroll your child for the manifested e-learning platform and see their grades grow tremendously. These videos can be downloaded to a laptop for offline viewing or viewed from a smartphone in a course-friendly format.
Welcome to Manifested e-learning. Today we are having a lesson in history and government, and we are continuing with our topic on introduction to history and government, and specifically we are looking at the sources of information to history and government. So in our previous lessons, we looked at the categories of sources of information to history and government. So my dear learner, can you be able to remember the categories in which we categorized these sources of information? The categories. So we said there are three categories of information, right? So we said there are three categories of information. So can you remember them? Number one, which we have already looked at, are unwritten sources. Unwritten sources. And my dear learner, can you remember the unwritten sources that we have already discussed in our previous lessons? Yes, I'm sure you are able to discuss. We discussed 5 of them. Can you be able to mention them? Yes, you can tell your friend there, your brother or sister. Yes, which are these unwritten sources? Yes, we looked at oral traditions. And then number 2, we looked at what else? Linguistics. Which other one did we look at? My dear learner, which other one? Archaeology, very good. Archaeology. Which other one did we look at? There are still 2 that we have not mentioned. Yes, very good. Anthropology. And then lastly we looked at genetics. So my dear learner, you should be able to remember these. What do they mean? What do these terms mean? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of using each source of information? So which are the other 2 categories of information or sources? So we have to look at the other 2. So we said the other 2, or the second one is written sources. And then number 3, we have electronic sources. So my dear learner, we have already looked at the unwritten sources. Now today, in our lesson today, we are going to look at these remaining 2, written sources and electronic sources. So by the end of this lesson, these are the objectives I want you to be able to achieve. Objectives for this lesson. So by the end of this lesson, my dear learner, you should be able to identify, right? Identify the written sources of information. All right? That is the first objective or the first goal I want you to be able to achieve by the end of this lesson. And then number 2, you have to outline the different electronic sources of information. The different electronic sources of information. So to start us off, let us look at the number 2 category of sources of information. Remember, we are talking of categories, and written, we have written and electronic. So number 2, let us look at the written sources of information. That is what we are discussing. Written sources. Written sources. So when we talk about written sources, these entails information that is written down in any form, as long as it is written down. It can be in form of a writing, it can be in terms of a painting, right? That as long as it is recorded down, that is a written source. So when we talk of written sources, it involves every kind of information as long as it is written down. It does not matter wherever it is written, whether it is on a wall, whether it is in a book, whether it is on a stone, it has to be written down, recorded down using a specific manner. It can be an engraving, right? It can be a painting on a wall, right? That is a written source. So when you talk of written sources, right, it means it is recorded down. So today, how do we record down? For example, the information that we are learning right now, right? You are taking notes on your book, right? That is recording down. That is a recorded information or written information, such that even when you are old, you have become a grandpa or a grandma, right? You can be, if you are able to find that book, you will get the information that you learned in this lesson, right? So there are different ways of writing or storing information. Before the writing of paper, because today we write on paper, right? We write on paper for you to record information. How do you think before the writing of paper or invention of paper came and using the modern pen, right? How are people writing down? How are people recording information? Yeah? How do you think they were recording information? So there are different ways in which they were recording information. So these could be in earliest times, in the earliest time. Let us first look at the earliest times, right? In the earliest times, before the invention of papers, right, came, people are writing down on tablets, stone tablets. That is where information could be written, and it is important information. For example, in your CRE, or you have heard the story of Moses and the 10 commandments, right? So at that time, there was no paper, right? So God decided to write his commandments for the children of Israel on a stone tablet, right? So on a stone tablet, we call that engraving, because you have to use some kind of a metallic object to write on that stone, right? So the writings are engraved, right? They are engraved on a stone, or you have to chop. If you are drawing an image, you have to chop the stone, right? In other places, there was paint. Yeah, in some cases, there was using of paint, right? So those were the earliest. The other one, or the other earliest example, A, we could talk of A. B, there was something else that was known as parchments. Parchments. So this is where you find in the ancient times, a skin of an animal could be dried, right? And then scrubbed. Then on that, there is use of paint to write information, to record. Most of the time, you could find they were recording names of the leaders of at that time, right? Or important events. For example, a victory in a war could be noted down in parchments. These were skins that were dried and then written on, right? And then number C, we had scrolls. This was a kind of reeds that could produce a very long sheet, right? A very long sheet that looked like a paper, right? And then on this scroll, information could be written. So you could write as you unscroll. So imagine we are having, I wish I could have that. Imagine this, you could have a paper that is tied down on these two, these could be sticks, and then it is tied on. So if you want to write, you have to scroll, and then you have to paint on the scroll, right? Yes, you could check up on the internet, you could find examples of scrolls. Now, when we come now to the modern times, right? So when you come to the modern times, yeah, just before we look at the modern times, you could have paintings. Yeah, before we come to the modern times, number D, we could have paintings. Paintings on caves and rocks. Paintings on caves and rocks. So you could find people storing information about what they are hunting, right? What are the animals they hunt? They could paint them in the caves they were living in, or on rocks where people could pass by. So that was another form of storing information. So let us come to the modern times. The modern times. The modern times. How do we now store information today? How do we record down information that is written down, right? We have examples, we have books, like the exercise books you are having. We have journals. Journals. Each and every day, somebody could be recording. Like today, my day was this and this. I went to such and such a place. I found this and this a person. That is a journal. Journaling down the events, the daily occurrences, right? That is a journal. We have diaries, right? Diaries. You have, for example, if you have so many clients, you have to make appointments on diaries. That is a diary. So if you find, for example, if you want to know the activities of a president, for example, where he is supposed to go or where he has been going, just go and find the diary. You will find the president on this day, at this time, he met so and so. That is a diary, right? Yes, we have other sources. We have newspapers. Newspapers. Yes, we have newspapers. Can you mention the newspapers we have in Kenya today? The different kind of newspapers we have in Kenya today. We have the Standard newspaper, very good. We have the Daily Nation, very good. We have the Taifa Leo, very good. Which other newspaper do you know? We have the Business Daily. That's a newspaper that is happening. The East African newspaper, right? So these newspapers, it provides information or news, the current news that is happening in the country or in the world today. You will find it from newspaper. So even 10, 20 years to come, if you want to know what happened today or in the year 2020, you just need to go to a media house or somebody who has been stocking the newspapers for each and every day. You'll be able to know what was happening at that time. So that is a newspaper, and many other forms that we cannot exhaust. The written forms are so many. You have you have talked of newspapers. We have talked of magazines, right? Magazines, right? We have talked of magazines. Yeah, we have talked of magazines. You could find specific series happening each and every time. So these are just written down. They are paper that you could see. Somebody has recorded an information that is happening. So you have to find these things. Huh? Another example that I can remember, you have a periodical. Periodicals. So this is an example of, you can talk of a pullout or a writing that is done over an individual over an interval of time. That is a periodical. Maybe it is written once every week or once every month or after every 3 months. That is a periodical. So you can find out which are other modern forms of written information. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of using written sources of information? So quickly, let us look at the advantages. Advantages of written information. Advantages of written information. Advantages of written information, right? So number one, information is more accurate. Information is more accurate. What does that mean? For example, if you are having a newspaper, right? A newspaper will record the events as they are occurring, right? So if an editor is writing down what is happening today, for example, we are having the case of locust invasion, right? The newspaper will record where that information or where those locusts are. If, for example, it is a diary, somebody has an appointment, a CEO of a company has an appointment. It is an appointment with a specific person, right? So once it has been written down, right, without rubbing, you will be able to know that is the accurate information, and you are able to compare one written source with another. For example, one newspaper with another newspaper. That brings accuracy. Information is more accurate compared to other sources. For example, anthropology, where it requires just the researcher to make a conclusion. And then, number two, the information or the source is cheaper. It is cheaper to pass mass information. It is cheaper to pass mass information. So if you want to pass information to a large audience, right, it is easier compared to genetics. Very few people will understand the characteristics of a human being that are passed from a parent to a child. But when you are having a newspaper, for example, a lot of people can be able to read the newspaper. That is the other advantage, right? And then number three, information can be translated. Can be easily translated. Information can be easily translated into other languages. For example, if you have a book that is written in Swahili, it is very easy for that book to be translated into English and vice versa, as compared to information that is you get from oral traditions. It will take you a lot of time to get one explanation of a legend from one group of a person. You go to the other one, they might be giving you different information. But now for a book, it is written down. So it's a matter of you translating a sentence after the other. And then number three, information can be stored. It allows future reference. Future reference is possible. Because information is written down, you are able to, even 10 years to come, to peruse through and know this is what was happening at that time. What are the disadvantages? What are the disadvantages of using this kind of a source? Disadvantage or a limitation. What are the limitations? Or we said another term that can be used here is a shortcoming. What are the disadvantages, right? So the biggest disadvantage of written sources is it's only limited to those people who can read and write, right? It is only limited to literate people. That means only those people who are able to read and write. If you are not able to read, you cannot get information from a newspaper, right? If you are not able to write, you cannot fill out a journal for yourself, right? So this information is only limited to those people who are literate, right? And then we say the writer, number 2, the writer can omit information. The writer can omit information. Take an example of a journal. You only write that which is exciting to you. You might want to omit another. You might want to omit information that is not conducive for you, right? And then number 3, the reader. The reader might misinterpret the information that is written down. The reader might misinterpret the information that is written down. That is another limitation. And then lastly, the writer. The writer might be biased. The writer must be biased. A very good example is the newspaper. Let's say we are having, remember when you are having political situation, or when you are having politics in our nation, you might find the Standard, for example, as a newspaper, decides to report what, for example, when you are having the last elections, what the NASA team is doing. And then the East African will decide to concentrate on what Jubilee is doing. So if you are just reading the Daily Nation, you are not able to know what the other thing or what the other team is doing. So my dear learners, we have been looking at the written sources of information. So as we come to the end of our lesson today, I'm sure you have been able to discuss what written sources of information are, right? So I want to give you an assignment that you are going to attempt, right? That you are going to attempt in your books. So you can write down these questions. Revision questions. Revision questions. So number 1, very easy questions. Name the earliest written sources of information. Name the earliest written sources of information, right? And then number 2, explain the disadvantages of relying only on written sources of information. On written sources of information. So number 1, name the earliest written sources of information. That is the first question. And then number 2, explain the disadvantages of relying only on written sources of information. And my dear learner, we have already discussed this, and as I always encourage you, try to write the answers, and then you can confirm from the notes that you have taken, or you refer back to the lesson that we have had. So until our next lesson, it's bye-bye.
you.